What's happening in Mississippi? It's Wednesday, January 15th of 2025. Hope you're having a great one. From MPB Think Radio, this is a Sit Down with Russ Latino, where we explore the ideas and the people that are shaping Mississippi's future. On today's program, we're going to talk to House Ways and Means Chairman Trey Lamar. Mr. Lamar is at the center of a huge piece of legislation that is working its way through the Mississippi legislature, one that could bring about the elimination of the state income tax, could bring about the reduction of the grocery tax. Big vision behind this piece of legislation, and it's set for a big debate this year. Trey, welcome onto the show, man. Good to have you.
Russ, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So, look, we've been having conversation around income taxes and tax reform in Mississippi for a long time, almost as long as I've been involved in Mississippi politics.
Yep.
I want to take a step back, and if you don't mind, just give me a sense of the vision for what you're trying to accomplish. What's the big picture in your mind?
Yeah, so I think to understand the big picture, you really got to go back and understand the history of kind of how we got to this point. So I became chair or vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee in 2016. And 2016 was really our first big tax reform effort when Governor Reeves was still lieutenant governor in charge of the Senate. We worked on that measure. And as it relates to the income tax, the 2016 legislation actually eliminated the 3% individual income tax bracket. Fast forward to 2022, we had, at that time, the largest tax cut in the history of the state that is currently being phased in right now, where we eliminated the 4% tax bracket and took the 5% bracket down to 4%. And so going all the way back to 2016, we've had a vision of being able to eliminate the tax on work, as I like to call it, in the state of Mississippi and free up our people to work and not be punished for working. And really moving toward more of a consumption-based tax model as opposed to one that taxes people's work and their productivity. So back in 2016, that's when this effort started. And here we are about 10 years later, and ironically, what this bill would do, the current bill, House Bill 1 that we're here today talking about and that's been filed in the Mississippi House of Representatives and will likely be taken up this week, is we're looking 10 years into the future. And so now we're at the point where we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, and really for the first time, we believe that we can put into law without a bill and language that would require no further legislative action to actually eliminate, completely phase out in 10 years the tax on work, which is the individual income tax for the state of Mississippi. So that's kind of a little bit of the history, how we got to this point. That's where we are. Russ, even the most conservative bona fides, though, have to admit that government has core functions. And the last several years, we have our general fund in the state of Mississippi has really been gutted by the amount of money that we're having to spend to take care of our highway system across the state. We've got real needs, whether that be Highway 15 in Ripley around the furniture plant up there, or whether that be I-55 through DeSoto County and other parts of northwest Mississippi, or right here in Madison, or I-10 on the coast. Those are, bad traffic areas that the people are demanding government to fix. Well, we're still operating our highway system on a 1987 funded model that was not indexed at the time, and it just, quite frankly, does not take care of the real needs we have in government. And so we also know we need to modernize the funding system for our highways. And so that's one thing the bill does in addition to eliminating the income tax. And it also takes into account the need for our retirement system. And so that's a big conversation that we've had over the last couple of years. Really last year, it kind of got hot and heavy. We had some minor reforms. There's more needed. There's probably a fifth tier that is needed eventually as well. But this bill would put $100 million a year of dedicated funding into the PERS system, which is our state and local retirement system for government employees, that where the government has made promises to our workers that we have to fulfill. And so by putting in that $100 million a year in perpetuity until such time as the fund becomes what we call 80% funded, which is a generally accepted standard in that world, then we are taking those burdens, if you will, off the general fund of the state of Mississippi, which allows us, it really frees us up, if you will, to really execute on the elimination of the income tax.
So that's a lot of different component pieces that you guys are trying to deal with is a pretty comprehensive package. I want to back up maybe and just get back to this idea around why the elimination of the income tax. 'Cause I think for a lot of people, listening to it would go, of course, I'd like to not be taxed on my work, right? But they also think to themselves, that sounds like a crazy concept because for all of our lives, anybody who's alive right now, they've been taxed on their income. Of course, there were people back, 100 years ago, 100 and some odd years ago, that weren't taxed on their income. So give me the short sort of elevator pitch on why eliminating the income tax is the right thing to do in terms of our...
First of all, let me just say, General, personally, I don't think government should be taxing work. Okay, I just don't. That's you can go back to policy, and if we were enacting a perfect tax code right now, I don't think that's what we would come up with. But it's what we've been handed down from years and years ago. So generally, I just think there's other ways to do it. There's 9 states in the country that show us that you can run a functioning state government without taxing people's work. So we're not on some crazy island over here having this conversation. But let me get a little more granular if I can. If there is one thing that if you asked me, one thing that would benefit the state of Mississippi more than anything else is that if we have more of our people working and taking care of their families. We have generally the lowest labor force participation rate in the entire nation. And what that measurement is, that is the measurement of the amount of able-bodied people who are capable of working that are actually working. That number is somewhere in the 50-something% range. If we want Mississippi to move forward and move off the bottom in so many areas, we need more of our people working. We need our private sector economy growing. That would help us more than anything else. And so, that being said, if we can at the same time show people, prove to you that we don't have to tax work, my question is, why in the world do we do that? Why would we tax work if we don't have to? If that's the one thing, if working is the one thing that could move Mississippi forward more than anything else, having more people working and taking care of their families, then why in the world would we disincentivize the one thing we need people doing by taxing it? We shouldn't. We should be incentivizing it by not taxing it.
Yeah, and look, I'll get super wonky with you on this point around the 9 states that don't have the income tax, right? Because there are states like Florida, there are states like Texas, Tennessee, New Hampshire, Wyoming, Washington State. For a lot of people think of Washington State as being this uber progressive liberal place, but Washington State doesn't have an income tax. And they're very different places, all of them. But collectively, what they do is they outpace national averages in an incredible way. So outpaces national average in terms of population growth. In fact, double the national average in population growth over the last 10 years. You look at the economic growth, it's about 40% above national average over the last 10 years. Incomes are going up at a faster pace in those states, which makes sense since it's not being taxed. Productivity goes up. So all of those things would suggest not only can a state survive with no income tax, the state can actually thrive with no income tax. Here's the other thing. Each one of those states, their revenue growth to the state government outpaces states that do have an income tax.
How about that?
So as the economy grows, there's more people out there buying things, seeking services. The end result of that is that you have a larger pot of money to invest in things like schools and roads and whatnot. So very interesting case study. We're talking with Trey Lamar about a bill that might eliminate the state income tax on work. We'll be back in just a moment for more. You're listening to The Sit Down on MPB Think Radio with Russ Latino, your host. We're joined today by State Representative Trey Lamar. He's the chairman of House Ways and Means. He's also been given the task of proposing what could be a transformative piece of legislation, certainly a big, comprehensive piece of legislation. You know, we were talking a little bit before the break about this idea of, can a state actually survive without an income tax? I think a lot of people in Mississippi know that, hey, that's $2.2 to $2.3 billion worth of revenue that flows into the state. And I was just mentioning that if you look at the states that don't have it, their revenue growth actually outpaces Mississippi's revenue growth.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all to hear you say that, Russ. And so, you know, I guess I'll go back to this. I spoke at the tax summit that the speaker had back in September, and, you know, had multiple hearings over the summers and the year. As I said earlier, we've been working on this for 10 years. But the way I have viewed my role this year is, look, I've got to, almost like I'm building a case for trial. You know, I've got to present my evidence to not only the House members, but the Senate and the public at large as to why we feel this is the best for Mississippi. And so I started out by saying I really got three goals. And number one, I want to have the most competitive, most fair, number one ranked tax code in the entire state. In the entire country, the entire nation. With the leadership we have in the House and the Senate and the governor's office, that there is no reason why that should not be our goal. And we've had that leadership for a number of years now. We probably rank somewhere, depending on what rankings you look at, somewhere around 20th to 25th, depending on the year. I want to be number one. And I think eliminating the income tax in Mississippi is a big part of that. I think a reduction on a necessity like food. Right now we have the highest grocery tax, sales tax on groceries in the nation. So although I don't think removing or cutting the tax on groceries is the game changer that getting rid of the income tax is, I do think it's a good thing not to have the highest tax in the country on something like food that everybody has to and needs to enjoy and to take care of their families. So when we cut the tax on food and groceries by half and we eliminate the income tax with this plan, I believe that you will see Mississippi's tax code jump in those rankings and put us near the top number one most competitive tax codes in the entire country. You mentioned some of the things that we have to do. There are some moving parts to the plan, and it is somewhat complicated, but I try to keep it simple. The second goal we had was to help our struggling cities and local governments, cities and counties. And that's where government is closest to the people. That's the people who where your policemen are, your firemen are. That's who takes care of most likely the roads in front of your house. That's who picks up your garbage. That's government where it's closest to the people, and they have real needs. I mean, the cost of building roads is expensive for the state. It's probably even more expensive for the cities because they got to get a contractor to come out to, to Kosciuszko, for example, or wherever you are in Mississippi. And so the goal was to help those cities if we could. And so what we did is we have always funded our cities with a diversion of the sales tax. We have a state 7% general sales tax, and the cities got 18% of that 7% went back to each city. That was state money that we were giving to the cities. Well, what the bill does is it takes the diversion away from the cities and replaces it with a 1.5% local option sales tax. A local option sales tax is a mechanism that most states have for their cities and their counties. Mississippi never has had that. And so we would allow the cities to have a 1.5% local option sales tax on top of the general 7% general sales tax rate. And that would result in a 15% increase in funding to each city across the state to help them with those things like fire, police, and infrastructure service to their citizens. On the county side, the 1.5% would go to fund the deficit we have at the Office of State Aid Road Construction, which is our county's number one priority. There's about almost $100 million deficit in that Office of State Aid Roads that affects a lot of our county road construction all over the state. And so that 1.5% would go to that office, and the 1.5% sold in the cities would go back to the cities. In exchange for that, in year one, we would take the current at the time, we're looking a year out because that's when the plan would go into effect roughly. We would take the income tax from 4 to 3 in year one, and then we would phase it out at 0.3 tenths a year.
And when you say year one, just so there's clarity, right now we have a tax cut that's in phase-in mode, right?
That's correct.
What you passed in 2022 is still being phased in, such that last year the tax rate was 4.7%.
Right.
This year it'll be 4.4%. And then in 2026, it'll go to 4. Is that right?
That's correct. And so what this bill does is proposes to just pick up at the end of that tax cut in 2020. Starts in 2000, parts of it start in July of 26, and then again in January of 27. It goes for a 10-year period. And at the end of the 10 years, what we would have would be no income tax in the state of Mississippi. We would have a grocery tax that was cut in half. And then our sales tax, the general sales tax rate would be at a total of 8.5% on non-grocery items. Groceries would be down around 4%, about cut in half. But the 8.5% on general items would be up 1% to 2% lower still than every state around us. If you look at the states of Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee, their general sales tax rate, what people actually pay at the cash register, is 9.5. In the state of Louisiana, it's 10.5. In Mississippi, it would be 8.5. So it would set us up in a way that would be where we would be most competitive in our region in the South, but also stand out in the nation as a whole. And then lastly, the third goal we have with this reform, which a lot of our business community is getting around, is fixing our broken highway funding model. And so we have a gas tax in the state of Mississippi that was set in place in 1987 without an index. And nobody likes to pay taxes, but if we want to eliminate the income tax, we've got to get MDOT out of our general fund. And we've had to prop up MDOT with our general fund, where our workers fund that through the income tax, because we have an old funding model from 1987, and it is incapable of funding a modern transportation system. So what the bill would do would add a 5% sales tax on the retail sales of fuel across the state. When you look at the taxes that are added, those result in about $1.1 billion. We're talking about it full phase in. And you look at the taxes that are taken off, that results in about a $2.2 billion tax cut, which results in a net tax cut of $1.1 billion, which would be the largest in the state's history, times 2.
What do you say to folks who hear, okay, they're going to eliminate my income tax, but I'm going to pay more in sales tax and more at the gas pump, and the criticism almost becomes, well, this is not really a tax cut, it's a tax swap. What's the response to that when you look at the way your bill is put together?
Yeah, so I would say look at the numbers that I just gave you. I mean, the numbers don't lie. They really don't. You just look at the math. It's $1.1 billion in new taxes. It's $2.2 billion in cuts. That's a net $1.1 billion tax cut that really vaults our tax code, as I said previously, to hopefully number one in the nation. Those same people I encourage them, look at the numbers. Let me give you another example. I've kind of kicked this around a little bit in my head. Let's say you're somebody that for whatever reason, you don't work, okay, and therefore you don't pay income tax. Maybe you're retired, and there's a misnomer out there. Some people think retired people don't pay any income tax. That's not true at all. I know a lot of retired people that still pay income tax. But what is true is that the state of Mississippi does not currently tax Social Security income nor income from a qualified retirement plan. But if you have other investments or you make money, or a lot of retired people I know still work, they're paying income tax. But let's just assume for purposes of this example that person does not pay an income tax. And I think this may be pretty average of a Mississippian, maybe a little high, but I'm going to give you these numbers. Let's say that same person spends $1,000 a month on groceries, which is food for them and their family. Let's say they spend $400 a month in fuel, gas for their car, okay? And they say they spend another $1,000 a month on things that are subject to the general sales tax rate, but they don't pay any income tax. In that scenario, that person has a $2.50 a month savings under this plan. That's the way it is, $2.50 a month. Now, is that going to change that person's world? No, it certainly is not. But it is not going to hurt anybody. And so that individual is not being hurt by the plan. And so that's what I try to implore these people. And the second thing I try to do is to ask them to please take a deep breath and look at the bigger picture. If if this plan doesn't really affect you because you look at the numbers, or if it has a moderate or a minor effect on you, I'm asking those people to look at the bigger picture with us and focus on a future Mississippi for your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren where they don't have to pay a tax on work. Because in that same scenario, let's say that same scenario applies to a family of four where a mom and a dad are working, making a combined $75,000 a year, okay? That's maybe mom makes 40 and dad makes 30, 35. Maybe kind of average, okay? The savings for that family are tremendous under this plan. When you add those who actually work in Mississippi and pay an income tax, the savings really add up. And somebody may say, well, look, how does that, the math is
Can you hold that thought?
I can.
We've got to go to break. We're talking with House Ways and Means Chairman Trey Lamar about House Bill 1. I guess it's 1 because it's important to you guys. We'll be back just in a moment. You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio. You're listening to The Sit Down right here on MPB Think Radio with your host, Russ Latino. Today we're talking to House Ways and Means Chairman Trey Lamar. I said before we went to break that it's probably HB1 for a reason. I assume this means that this is a priority not only for you, but for the House of Representatives this year.
It is. We let this bill be filed first, so it would have the label of House Bill 1, and it is the singular priority for the House leadership, the Speaker's office, and I really expect a unanimous vote from the House Republican caucus, and I also expect several Democrats who have expressed interest in supporting this legislation. So I look forward to that vote, which hopefully will come sometime this week.
So let's recap a little bit of the numbers, and I'll summarize, and you just tell me if I've got it wrong or right. What you're looking to do is it would fully eliminate the state income tax, or the tax on work, as you say, by 2037. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. You add essentially a 1.5 cents local sales tax option that applies not only to municipalities but also to counties.
That's right.
And the county money goes to the Office of State Aid Roads for county roads, and that's $80 million a year?
Approximately, yes.
Give or take. And then you also are removing the sales tax exemption on gasoline that currently exists and putting in place essentially a 5-cent sales tax on gasoline.
That's right. Yeah, 5%.
And that generates what?
That would generate about, depending on the exact price of fuel these days, but somewhere in the neighborhood on average around $400 million for MDOT.
Okay. And then because you're giving that $400 million to MDOT, you're shifting lottery funds that currently go to MDOT. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's about $80 million.
It would be currently at MDOT. It would be $80 million is what they get now. Yes.
Okay, but you're shifting that money into a larger pool of $100 million that will go towards state retirement.
That's correct.
Okay, because I think people. One, this is an audacious thing that you guys are talking about, right? And there are a lot of moving parts.
It's big.
But I think the PERS segment, which I'm not sure if we talked about yet or not, is very interesting. Well, you mentioned Tier 5 earlier. It's very interesting in that we've clearly got a problem with the state retirement system, right? And I think some of the natural response to any conversation about reducing state taxes and reducing revenue is, well, how are we going to pay for PERS or education or roads?
That's right.
And it seems like you guys are trying to answer those questions here.
We are. And, you mentioned the big three. You mentioned education, which education over the last 3 to 4 years has gotten an influx of probably close to $600 million of recurring revenue. We've taken care of education more than we ever have by far. We've got this plan takes care of the need we have at our highway system, and it has a piece that really plugs a serious hole in that actuarial gap that we have in the retirement system. That's where government's made promises to our employees. You've got retired teachers and firemen and law enforcement officers and everybody that's worked for a city or a state or a community college or the state government. Those are promises that the government has made to those people who have given their lives really in those services, and we've got to fulfill that. So we can't just sit there and watch where that thing continues to be 65, 60, 55% funded. We've got to get it back up to around 80%.
And so this funding would continue until you hit that 80% mark?
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I think one of the things that I would say in response to people, and look, your plan is going to have some flaws in it, right? People are going to point out those flaws.
Sure.
Other people are going to have other sets of ideas, and that's just the nature of the process. One of the things I would say generically as we have a conversation about what does transformative tax reform look like is if you look over the last 10 years in Mississippi, you guys have done multiple major tax cuts or tax reforms, 2 individual income tax reforms, and then several corporate tax reforms. And what you see over the last 10 years, a lot of people, as you guys were doing those things, said, hey, if they do this, state revenue is going to fall in a hole. We're not going to be able to fund core functions. I looked at the numbers yesterday, Chairman Lamar, and it was very fascinating to me. Over the last 10 years, state revenue, according to DOR, Department of Revenue, has gone up 39%.
Yep, imagine that.
Even as there were multiple tax cuts that were occurring. And the area that it went up the most, 2 areas, corporate taxes, which a lot of times people say, well, corporations aren't doing their fair share. Corporate taxes went up 63% in terms of revenue collections.
Yep.
And then the other area was this sales tax piece that's gone up 49% in the last 10 years, close to $2 billion when you look at the whole number,
right?
Which is incredible. And that's without the rate increasing, which means that people are out there buying and consuming more.
That's right. When people have more money in their pocket, odds are they're going to spend more money. They're going to do something fun, or they're going to take their family shopping, or they're going to do what they choose to do with their money. And that's the whole purpose of getting rid of the income tax. When the government taxes a man's or a woman's income, that man or woman loses the freedom of choosing what to do with that money. The government takes it before they ever get it. And so we talk about just, freeing up our workforce to have more disposable money in their pocket. They can save it. They can spend it. I mean, this is America. And so I love the aspect of that part of eliminating the income tax as well is look, it's real. Going to a more of a consumption-based model is a fair system. I started to say this a minute ago before we had to go to a break. And so one of the reasons people are like, well, I don't think your math is right. Well, I can promise you there's people a whole lot smarter than me that are running the numbers behind the scenes, and our math is right. But here's one way it helps. When the state government taxes income, it only taxes our citizens' income, or people here that are in Mississippi working. When we move to a consumption-based model, that person that's driving from Kansas to Florida that buys fuel here in Mississippi or stops to eat or to shop in Jackson or Madison or DeSoto County or wherever, or the people in Memphis that come to DeSoto County to shop, or the people that travel to the Mississippi Gulf Coast to spend time there, but may be from another state, they're contributing their fair share to our state economy that does not then have to be borne only by our citizens. And so you're spreading it out. And let me give you another example. The guy who was the criminal, if you will, who's on the street selling drugs or selling other illicit material, or he's doing other things that he shouldn't be doing, has a cash economy, a cash business that is breaking the law, guess what that person doesn't do? That person does not pay an income tax. That same person cannot, however, escape a sales tax. They have, when they go to the store and order products or spend their money, they still have to pay a sales tax with the cash that they make illegally. So that takes burden off of the people who are working in a legal fashion and actually paying the income tax currently. It removes the burden from them and spreads it out where everybody pays more of their fair share.
Now, are the folks at the Department of Revenue mad at you? Because if you eliminate the income tax, that eliminates a lot of administrative need for taking in tax returns and considering tax returns and auditing tax returns.
Well, people have said, what about the spending? Well, I said, well, we are going to keep spending down. That's one thing that the Speaker White and I have talked about going forward. We need to do everything we can to hold down spending. But to what your point you just made, this bill, just one agency, Department of Revenue, it will, over the life of the next 10 years, force that agency to become smaller and reduce the size of government in that one agency, because we won't need all of those people pouring through, hundreds of thousands of state tax returns.
Because that's one of the arguments that I think tax experts or some tax experts make, a lot of economists would make too, is that a sales tax is actually the most efficient form of taxation.
Sure.
From an administrative standpoint. One, to your point, everybody pays it. There's not the same ability to use loopholes and get around it, right?
Right.
And two, it happens at the point of sale. It happens at the point of sale, but you've only got a few thousand taxpayers in the retailer versus having, 1.2 million taxpayers in the state of Mississippi that are doing some kind of work. And so when you hear like an economist talk about efficiency, a lot of times they're talking about that when they're talking about a sales tax. Let me play devil's advocate with you, though.
Okay.
Argument will be used and has been used in the past when we talk about sales taxes that they are regressive. How do you respond to that?
Well, my response as far as it relates to this specific plan is as follows. One reason we reduce drastically the tax on groceries. We look at necessities in the state, and people have to have food to eat and feed their families. So I like that part of the plan, and it really cuts away at the recessive nature of just strictly going up on sales tax. So yes, we do go from 7 to 8.5 on the general sales tax rate, but we take the grocery tax in the plan from 7 to 4, which is essentially half of what the general rate would be at that point in time. And so we are freeing people up to spend more money on the necessities of life, and if they want to go spend money on other non-necessary items over and above that, then they can do that if they want to. But I think that helps with the recessive nature of it. I really do. And, Russ, we're talking about 1.5%. So we're talking about a total 8.5% general sales tax rate, which, as I said earlier, and I'll emphasize this again, that's less than every state around us. So that same person that lives in in New Albany, Mississippi, and may be worried about the recessive nature of this plan that we're talking about today, let's say that's a Bubba that lives up there. Well, there's another Bubba that lives across the state line in Red Bay, Alabama, that's been paying 9.5% sales tax for years and years and years, and is doing just fine over in Red Bay, Alabama. So what we're talking about is nothing that's so far out of the norm that I believe it's going to cause any harm to anybody.
We're talking with House Ways and Means Chairman Trey Lamar about a bill that has been filed that will be considered, maybe voted on by the end of this week.
Yeah.
That would eliminate the state income tax, but do an awful lot of other things as well. Brings down the grocery tax, addresses the sales tax on gasoline, addresses PERS funding, does a lot of different things. Obviously, this is going to be a hot button issue throughout the course of the legislative session. We're going to see a Senate plan at some point. When we get back from break, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the potential hurdles, also what might come out of the Senate, and how we approach these big questions moving forward as a state. You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB. Be back in just a second. You're listening to Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio. Still visiting with House Ways and Means Chairman Trey Lamar. You know, I think one part of the equation is what do we do in terms of taking in money as a state? The other part of the equation that you alluded to is how are we spending that money?
Yeah.
And I will tell you, my biggest concern whenever we have this conversation is not that I look at the numbers and think, well, this is not feasible, it can't be done. I think the numbers show that there's a way to accomplish something big like this. My biggest concern is that that way could be impeded if the legislature gets spin drunk.
Yeah, I agree with that. And thankfully, there are those of us that are, that are in some of the positions where we're in and are going to really look at holding down spending. We have increased spending, Russ, over the last 3 to 4 years. Just being perfectly honest with you, more than I probably would have liked. But there were some real needs out there. We have we had the federal government breathing down our neck at some of our corrections issues that we've had. A lot of those government's never going to have everything fixed perfectly, but a lot of those needs have been addressed. I mentioned earlier the additional spending we're doing in education, but we're at a place where we can kind of really slow down the spend that we have and the increase in the spend at the state level as far as how we appropriate the state tax dollars. And where we are financially right now is that we are running projected this month or this year, this fiscal year, to run approximately a $700 million surplus, and we've got almost $2.5 billion of reserves in the bank. That's on top of the money we have for our regular budget that we've approved. So we are in a position where, and I want to stress this on the listeners, the opportunity to do something big and transformative like this is now. It is before us right now. And we do not need to let it pass us by. Obviously, I'm a Republican. When I came in 2012, the state of Mississippi and its people have continued to elect Republicans to lead the Mississippi House, to lead the Mississippi Senate, and the governor's office. And through that, if we don't do something big and take advantage of the opportunity that's before us right now that we've been given, then that's on us, and we have to own that.
So one of the things that I think you'll hear over the course of this session is, hey, look, we just passed a tax cut in 2022. Mm-hmm. It's not even done being phased in yet. We don't really fully know the effects of it yet. And so I think there will be some folks who will urge or suggest that this is premature and maybe we should be more cautious before we dive into this. And wait, let's wait until the 2026 phase-in is complete, and then we would look at something. Or if we're going to do something big, there's no need right now to say we're definitely eliminating the income tax. How do you respond to that?
So probably a couple ways. I would say that's one reason that this current plan does not go into effect until the previous plan concludes, which is starts phasing in July of 26. So normally the bills we pass would go into effect this year in 25. So we put it off a year to make sure we get past the end of the 22 tax plan that we had. And then I would just say the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, with our current financial situation is before us now. If we wait another year, there's going to be naysayers that say, well, look, we're in the third year of a term. Well, we got to run next year. We can't be looking at raising any taxes this year. We can't be looking at moving around with taxes because people may think we're doing something they don't. There's always going to be an excuse. And this is what I want to impress upon everybody I talk to about this plan, is that the opportunity is before us now. Let's not let it pass us by. Nobody can guarantee me that Tate Reeves is still going to be governor a year from now. I hope he is. Nobody can guarantee me that I'm going to be in the spot I'm in a year from now. We don't know who may be lieutenant governor 3 years from now. But we know the landscape today, and we know the opportunity that we have today, and we do not need to let it pass us by.
Anything else big you're working on?
Ways and
or
Means,
small.
Yeah, Ways and Means has always got some things that we're working on. There's several tax credit programs that are up this year. That's kind of a little bit, as you said, used that word earlier, wonky, but we've been able to accomplish a lot of good for a lot of people with some of our tax credit programs over the last several years, and I hope to expand some of those this year.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother show as how you do tax credits if you eliminate the income tax. That's a conversation maybe for another day. We do 5 quick questions to end the program, Trey. Yes, and so, and these are very hard questions. I'll just let you know in advance. Sweet tea or unsweet tea?
Woo, unsweet definitely, but the 20-year-old me would have probably hit me if he heard me say that at age 44.
You're driving down the interstate. Hypothetically, you're going 95 miles an hour. You look down. What are you jamming out to?
Old school country. That's
Okay.
my jam. I mean, just something easy listening, and old country is kind of where I'm at. And thankfully, there's some new guys that sound a lot like old country that I listen to some these days.
Cornbread or biscuits?
Both. It just depends.
This is like talking to Soggy Sweat right now. If by whiskey you mean, come on, give me a definitive answer, Trey.
If I'm going down the aisle at my mama's house and she's got both, I'm picking cornbread.
Okay. one hidden gem in Mississippi you think folks should know about? Could be a place, could be a restaurant, whatever.
I got to give a shout out to a place in my hometown of Senatobia, Mississippi. There is a little lunch cafe called the Fresh Garden Market, and it is absolutely my favorite smokehouse in the state of Mississippi. And when you're in North Mississippi, you will not find a better smokehouse from Memphis to Oxford. And so it's on Highway 51 right there in Senatobia, Fresh Garden Market. Go check it out.
Trey, Chairman Lamar, thanks for coming in and having a conversation about what will be a consequential piece of legislation. Obviously, the public's going to be following this, figuring out what it means for them individually. And part of what I would encourage people to do is not only think about what does it mean for you individually. This is my JFK moment. Right. That's not what your country can do for you. But as we think about these big sorts of ideas, what is the long-term impact on the state of Mississippi? Because, yeah, you might save $250 a month by eliminating the income tax, which is great for you. Mm-hmm. But think about what is the long-term impact for the state if we create an environment where families across the state have the ability to invest in themselves and their communities and their businesses, and what that means for our trajectory as a place that we love and want to live. And so any policy like this, I really would encourage folks to think big.
Please. And I echo what you said, that I would tell the people and your listeners that it's tremendous. If Mississippi can stand up and show not only to the rest of the nation, but really to the world, come do business in Mississippi, look what we're doing, that's a great thing.
You've been listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino. We've had a great guest and Chairman Trey Lamar from the House today. I know he's probably running the roads doing a lot of media today and throughout the week. The Sit Down is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting Think Radio, funded by generous contributioners. That's not a word. Contributions from listeners like you. Today's show was produced by Germaine Flood with live stream production by Joseph Hall. Special guest, Trey Lamar. I'm Russ Latino. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy at 11 a.m. and join us back here next week for a new episode of The Sit Down on MPB Think Radio.